Russia accused of war crimes as a rocket and missile attack hits Ukraine's second city, killing civilians. President Zelensky calls the bombardment of Kharkiv state terrorism as we witness firsthand the destruction fast unfolding in front of its residents.
We are crying every day, every night. We are crying every day. You should stop it. Immediately stop it.
The strike here this morning in Freedom Square represents a bleak new chapter in this war. Russia appears to be targeting the very symbols of the Ukrainian state.
Also tonight, Russian troops continue their advance towards the capital, Kyiv. This as the Kremlin warned the city's people to leave their homes. Moments later, a huge explosion at its TV tower. Fighting for our freedoms, the EU's standing ovation in reaction to President Zelensky's impassioned speech.
And these are Ukrainian children who are there taking the hit.
As the PM comes face to face with the anger, hurt and fear of the Ukrainian people.
This is the ITV Evening News with Charlene White.
Good evening. Ukraine's president accused Russia of war crimes today as airstrikes reportedly hit schools, hospitals and residential buildings. Invading Russian forces appear to have stepped up their assault on key Ukrainian cities and densely populated urban areas. Missile attacks included strikes on government buildings, a concert hall and opera house in the centre of Kharkiv, Ukraine's second city. Our correspondent Dan Rivers was the first broadcast journalist to reach Kharkiv's central square following the attack, and from there sent this special report.
This is Kharkiv's Freedom Square, but this morning freedom was under attack once again. Missiles slamming into the main local government building. President Zelensky has called this open, undisguised terror. A week ago, the view from this window was onto a European square bustling with life. Now, it is a glimpse into the grim future which seems to await this country. The search for survivors and recovery of the dead took place amid the constant threat of secondary attacks. So far, at least 10 people are confirmed to have died, and many more have been injured.
There
was a strong explosion from the square that blew off all the glass. Everyone who was near window was seriously hurt. I was okay. We were all heading downstairs to the basement when second missile came and hit the roof.
We arrived 4 hours after the attack, which has shattered the very heart of this city. The aftermath still painfully fresh. All around reminders of the terrible human cost. The occupants of this car must have been driving past just as the missiles fell. Survival or death here was a matter of chance. But remarkably, young Ukrainians were already out, risking their lives to clear up.
I'm sad. I don't know how we will rebuild it after the war.
The strike here this morning in Freedom Square represents a bleak new chapter in this war. Russia appears to be targeting the very symbols of the Ukrainian state, hoping to bring its people to their knees. But what we found here today is defiance. The rage at those responsible for all this is visceral.
It's awful. It's awful. It's awful war. We are crying every day, every night. We are crying every day. You should stop it. Immediately stop it.
But the Russians weren't finished yet. In the afternoon, another attack, hitting a building near a hospital. From another angle, you can see the extent of the damage to apartments in the street. Amid the sound of more rockets, we ventured into another of the city's hospitals. Inside, we found the basement is now a bomb shelter for children bewildered by how their lives have suddenly been upended. In the ward upstairs, just some of those injured so far in Kharkiv. After such a day of appalling bloodshed, you might expect the people here to be cowed. But if anything, their spirit appears galvanized against President Putin's aggression.
Well, Dan is back in Dnipro to the south of Kharkiv tonight. Dan, have Russian tactics changed?
They appear to be. They seem to have abandoned these special forces runs into the centre of the city, realising they're encountering very stiff resistance, and now seem to be going for the infrastructure of the state, really, that building. We've seen this TV tower hit as well, trying really to disable the government of President Zelensky by force. But what we're seeing on the ground, and we saw today, is that the people are not backing down in the face of this Russian aggression. Very bravely, they were coming out today and giving a very clear message to President Putin that they are there and they will resist.
Dan, thank you. Ukraine says 136 civilians have been killed in the war so far, 26 of them children. And the pictures and names of some of the victims are beginning to emerge. Polina was a 10-year-old schoolgirl. It's thought she was shot dead by Russian soldiers as she travelled in a car in Kyiv with her family. Her parents were also killed. Polina's brother, Semyon, and sister Sofia are in a critical condition in hospital. 20-year-old Indian medical student Naveen Ganagodva was killed in Kharkiv this morning. Naveen was queuing for food outside a grocery store when he was hit by the heavy shelling of the city. And we have mother of two, Sasha Polesh-Iuk. Her 12-year-old son desperately tried to save her when their home in Kherson was shelled by the Russians. She was dead when he pulled her from the rubble. Well, the rising number of civilian victims follows an increase in Russian air attacks on densely populated urban areas. And there was an ominous warning tonight from the Russian Defence Ministry for residents in Kyiv to leave their homes ahead of fresh airstrikes. As we saw in Dan's report, there's been intense shelling and missile attacks on Kharkiv, and a long convoy of Russian troops has been spotted slowly approaching the capital. Our Europe editor James Mates is in Kyiv tonight, where fresh strikes have already begun.
The Russians warned this afternoon communication hubs in Kiev city centre are now to be targeted. Within 2 hours, this was an attack on one of the city's TV towers. Seen from another angle as the second missile hits. Until now, central Kiev had been largely spared. As in Kharkiv, though, there has clearly been a change of policy. Yesterday's missile strike on an apartment block and the apparent use of cluster munitions seen in this attack led the Ukrainian President Zelensky to use a speech to the European Parliament to accuse Russia of war crimes.
Yesterday, 16 children were killed. Again and again, President Putin is going to say that is some kind of operation and we are hitting a military infrastructure. Where are our children? What kind of military factories do they work at?
The official translator struggled to keep the tears out of his voice.
We are fighting just for our land and for our freedom.
The response from those listening, a standing ovation. The contrast for Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov could hardly have been clearer. As he spoke by video linked to a European human rights conference, most of his audience simply walked out. In the suburbs of Kiev lies the evidence of fierce ongoing battles, the carcasses of military columns still lining many roads. There's no way of keeping count, but both sides have suffered horrible losses. This video has emerged from the first day of fighting. Ukrainian soldiers using handheld anti-aircraft weapons against helicopters. Fatally underestimating their enemy, one of the helicopters is hit.
Yes! Yes!
And is then seen to crash in flames into the Dnieper River. Whether the huge convoy seen in satellite photos snaking its way towards Kiev is making the same mistake may become clear in the next few days. There is no sign yet of a resumption of yesterday's peace talks, though one hopeful sign is that China is now backing a ceasefire. Having appeared to support Moscow originally, it's now hoped they may put some pressure on President Putin. James Mates, ITV News, Kiev.
And this is Kyiv tonight. Let's take a look. Where many residents have been seeking self-shelter underground during the overnight airstrikes. That's why the streets look so quiet, because tonight it is a city bracing for more attacks. Our global security editor, Rohit Katcher, is inside a bunker tonight. Rohit, it's quite a worrying night ahead, isn't it?
Yeah, very worrying. I mean, you wouldn't know it from the giggles of the kids around us. To them, this is now almost normal life. But underneath the streets here, the silent streets above us, there are dozens of people who've been streaming down during the day. The curfew has just come into effect. But even when the curfew isn't happening, people are just coming here for shelter, for comfort with strangers and with friends as well. What's so worrying this evening is that new information, that new warning from the Russian military about specific locations which they might target, and their warning to people living nearby them to actually evacuate. And so people are gathering in places like this. They're bringing their parents, they're bringing their kids. We've seen people painting flags, and any moment now, everyone here will gather together to sing a prayer devoted to Ukrainian soldiers who are fighting this fight against the Russian army, an army which is said now to be just a few miles from where we're standing.
OK, thanks very much for that. No more contrast in hearing him speak while those children play behind him. Right, still to come in the ITV Evening News. Well, with the Prime Minister, as he hears firsthand the terror experienced by Ukrainians, and why Prince Charles broke protocol to comment on the crisis. Those stories and more after the break. Welcome back. Boris Johnson came face-to-face today with Ukrainian frustration at what its people feel is a lack of Western action. As he visited Poland and Estonia to show UK support, he was asked why he wouldn't back a NATO no-fly zone. Ukrainian journalists told him women and children are living in fear of the bombs and missiles falling from the sky. Our international affairs editor, Raghi Omar, is travelling with the Prime Minister and sent this report.
6 days into a European war, and the Prime Minister set foot in Poland, Ukraine's neighbour and a country living in the shadow of Russia.
How are you?
I'm very well.
How are you?
So how are you?
Message to Poland, they're in the front line. They've got to cope with huge numbers of refugees already coming into Poland. So I'll be talking to Prime Minister Morawiecki about what we're going to do to help.
It's only a few hours' drive to the Ukrainian border from the streets of Poland's capital, and this country has already taken in 500,000 Ukrainians who've fled. The Prime Minister made a commitment that Britain too will be taking in more Ukrainian refugees.
So what we're going to do is we're extending the family scheme so that actually very considerable numbers would be eligible. As I set out earlier, you could be talking about a couple of 100,000.
But it was the words of one Ukrainian journalist who had fled, leaving behind her loved ones, that took centre stage.
Ukrainian people are desperately asking for the West to protect our sky. We are asking for the no-fly zone. So you're coming to Poland. You're not coming to Kiev, Prime Minister. You're not coming to Lviv because you are afraid, because NATO is not willing to defend. I see that my family members, that my team members are saying that we are crying. We don't have where to run.
Acutely conscious that there is not enough that we can do as the UK government to help in the way that you want. And the UK would be engaged in shooting down Russian planes, would be engaged in direct combat with Russia. That's not something that we can do. And
The Prime Minister told me he understood the question Daria Kilianuk had so passionately asked was essential, but Britain could not go to war with Russia.
What do you make of that young woman, Daria, when she was asking you about NATO actually grasping the nettle and realising that we have to sort of commit, forces in order to stop him, because they can't?
And I sympathise so much with what she said, and in a way I was grateful that she was able to escalate that issue in the way that she did, because that is in many ways, for many people, that is the unspoken question. Why not just engage militarily? But that's not something that any NATO member is thinking of doing.
This evening, the Prime Minister visited British troops and armour that's been deployed to NATO ally Estonia. These soldiers of the Royal Welsh Regiment are here to safeguard Estonia's independence. Ragio Martapa Base, Estonia.
Poland continues to take the bulk of the refugees fleeing the war. The United Nations says almost 680,000 have left Ukraine. Lucy Watson is on the Polish-Ukrainian border for us. Lucy, people are continuing to arrive there in huge numbers, aren't they?
Yes, Charlene, this is night 6 of this refugee crisis, and the stream of people coming across the border into Poland is constant, and this is the kind of situation that greets them. I don't know if you can see just behind me here, this is hot food being given out and drinks. It is a sea of aid, pretty much. Over here, we have people being given out SIM cards for their telephones, and behind all of these almost food stalls, if you like, there is a tent village that is starting to be put up for people who need to stay the night here. But this is what happens when they first arrive. They come directly from the border crossing and they come in coaches. This is really quite organised. They then get off the coaches and are able to get things that they so desperately need. There are car seats here, there have been cots, there are shoes, and there are clothes, as well as supplies like water. Now, this has been an incredibly swift mobilisation of civic solidarity, but also a very organised one. And tonight, there is some aid getting to the immediate area of Ukraine just beyond that border of tents, blankets, food and water for those waiting in line for some 60, 70 hours to cross to safety.
As always, Lucy, thank you. In a break from royal protocol today, Prince Charles commented on the invasion of Ukraine, condemning President Putin for the brutal aggression. He was speaking at a ceremony to mark Southend-on-Sea in Essex becoming a city following the murder of the MP Sir David Amess. The Prince described both events as attacks on democracy.
We are seeing those same values under attack today in Ukraine in the most unconscionable way. In the stand we take here, we are in solidarity with all those who are resisting brutal aggression.
And before we go tonight, some good news about the Queen. Just over a week after testing positive for coronavirus, she was seen for the first time earlier today. The Queen hosted 2 virtual engagements from Windsor Castle with the ambassadors for Andorra and Chad. She's undertaken only light duties from Windsor since contracting the virus. Well, that's all for now. Tom will be here a little earlier than usual at 9:30 for a specially extended programme after the football. But from everybody here and the team in Ukraine, bye-bye.